It was a sweltering summer night in Florida. Inside a small-town hospital, an exhausted nurse walked down the corridors carrying two newborn babies. Her steps were unsteady, and the faint smell of alcohol betrayed the secret bottle hidden in her locker. All it took was a single moment of distraction, a distant gaze, and the babies were placed in the wrong cribs. Subscribe now, or this might be our last meeting. Follow, comment, and share to stay connected. In the brightly lit waiting room, a wealthy businessman, Richard Collins, received in his arms the daughter he believed to be his heir. Tears of emotion rolled down his face. Beside him, his wife, Elizabeth Collins, a refined woman with a steady gaze, gently caressed the child's cheek. "She's perfect. Our greatest gift," Richard whispered, his voice breaking with pride. On the other side of the hospital, in a modest room, a humble couple welcomed their newborn daughter. The father, Miguel Ramirez, his hands roughened by years of labor, held the baby carefully, as if she were made of glass. His wife, Rosa, sweaty and exhausted, cried tears of joy. "She will be strong like you, my love, and gentle, like I hope life will be to her," Rosa said, her voice tired but filled with hope. And so, fate was sealed. Two baby girls, two families, two destinies, forever switched. Years passed. The girl raised in the luxury of Miami grew up surrounded by parties, designer dresses, and lavish trips. Her father, always busy with business, gave her everything money could buy. "You deserve the best, my daughter," Richard would say, never realizing he was feeding her arrogance. Her mother tried to set boundaries, but her words rarely mattered. Within the golden walls of that mansion, a spoiled and entitled young woman was taking shape, Victoria Collins. Meanwhile, in the small coastal town, the other girl ran barefoot through the streets, helped her mother wash clothes, and accompanied her father in small jobs. The family's love was her greatest treasure. But fate turned cruel. Rosa fell ill and passed away too soon. On her deathbed, she clutched Miguel's hand and made one final plea. "Take care of our little girl. She needs you." With tears streaming down his face, Miguel promised he would raise their daughter, Isabella, for both of them. In the Miami mansion, Richard Collins was no longer there. A sudden heart attack had taken him when Victoria was still a teenager. His absence left the girl even more spoiled and out of control. Now an adult, Victoria drove her luxury car through the streets of Miami. Bored, she argued with her mother for more money to buy designer handbags. "You never understand what I need," she shouted, slamming the door as Elizabeth sighed in silence, weary of her daughter's arrogance. In the coastal town, Isabella worked as a waitress in a seaside restaurant. Each night, her father Miguel waited for her at home, preparing a simple dinner and keeping his promise to Rosa. After her shift, Isabella would sit quietly, gazing at an old photo of her late mother. "I'll make you proud, Mama." "I promise," she whispered. In a modest house, an elderly woman opened a drawer. Inside were yellowed papers and old photographs from the hospital. Her hands trembled as she held the birth record. Tears streamed down her face. It was Helen Porter, the nurse who had committed the fatal mistake 20 years ago. "I have to tell the truth before it's too late," she murmured. With shaking fingers, she dialed a number. On the other end of the line, Elizabeth Collins answered. As Helen revealed the secret, Elizabeth's expression shifted. First disbelief, then shock, and finally, tears spilling down her cheeks. In that moment, the lives of two families were about to change forever. The night seemed endless. In the silent Collins mansion of Miami, Elizabeth still held the phone, stunned by the nurse's call. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded like a drum. The words echoed mercilessly in her mind. Your daughter is not your daughter. She was switched at birth. Tears slid down her cheeks in silence. She walked slowly through the darkened house until she stopped in front of a large portrait of her late husband Richard. The photo showed him smiling, holding their little girl in his arms. Elizabeth touched the frame with trembling fingers. If only you were here, my love, what would you do? She whispered. The pain of loss surged back with force. Since Richard's death, she had carried alone the burden of raising a difficult daughter, one who had grown more arrogant, more ungrateful, more distant with every passing year. And now, this revelation from the nurse felt like a weight too heavy to bear. Victoria stormed down the stairs with firm steps, tossing her expensive purse onto the sofa. I need more money. My friends are going on a trip, and I can't be left out. You don't want me to look like a fool, do you? Elizabeth watched her daughter in silence. She saw in her everything she feared most: pride, vanity, emptiness. The words from the nurse burned inside her chest. Something had to change. Taking a deep breath, she replied softly but firmly, Money isn't everything, Victoria. One day you'll understand that. Victoria rolled her eyes and left without even saying goodbye. That same evening, Miguel Ramirez returned home exhausted, carrying heavy boxes from the docks. But when his daughter Isabella rushed to meet him with a smile, the weight on his shoulders seemed to vanish. Sit down, Papa. I already made dinner, she said warmly. Miguel sat at the modest wooden table, gazing for a moment at the faded photograph of Rosa, his late wife. If your mama could see the woman you've become, she would be so proud, he said with a soft smile. A respectful silence filled the room. There was little food, but plenty of warmth. In that humble home, love was the richest dish served. Back in the mansion, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She paced through the grand living room like a restless soul, her thoughts circling endlessly. With every step, the nurse's words echoed. The girls were switched. Your real daughter grew up in another home. Slowly, an idea began to take form. It was not enough to simply reveal the truth. It was not enough to return the daughters to their rightful families. That would only bring justice. But what she wanted was redemption. Victoria's arrogance had to be broken. Isabella's humility needed to be tested. Only then could both girls truly discover who they were meant to be. Elizabeth stood before Richard's portrait once more, whispering as if he were listening, I will do this for her, for the daughter we raised, and for the daughter we lost. Maybe it's the only way to save them both. The sun was rising over Miami, painting the windows of the Collins mansion in gold. Elizabeth hadn't closed her eyes all night. The revelation from the evening before burned in her mind like an open wound. She needed answers. She needed to face the truth with her own eyes. She drove to a small house in a quiet neighborhood. There, she found the elderly nurse, her body bent under the weight of years and guilt. The door creaked open, revealing a frail woman with tear-filled eyes haunted by remorse. Thank you for coming, the nurse whispered, her voice trembling. Elizabeth's voice was low, but firm. I had to hear it from you. Face to face. They sat in a modest living room. Between them lay a small table covered with old photographs, faded hospital records, and a yellowed birth certificate. Helen Porter's hands shook as she picked up one of the photographs. That night I was too tired, and I had been drinking to numb the pain I carried inside. It was just a moment, only a moment of carelessness, but I switched the cribs. And I have lived with that burden every day since. Forgive me for stealing both their lives. Elizabeth's tears fell in silence. The quiet in the room screamed louder than any words. With trembling fingers, she touched the papers spread before her. So it's true. My daughter is not my daughter. Helen nodded, crying silently. And the real one lived a life she should never have known. That same day, Miguel Ramirez worked in his small repair shop, wiping grease from his hands. Through the open door, he watched his daughter Isabella laughing with her friends on the street. Pride swelled in his chest, and he murmured softly to himself, "She's my life, my greatest victory." He lifted his eyes toward the sky as though speaking to Rosa, his late wife. "I know you're watching over her from above." At that very hour, Victoria Collins was scolding the maid over a dress that hadn't been ironed to her liking. Her sharp words filled the mansion with tension. Elizabeth, watching from a distance, felt her heart sink deeper into despair. That night, alone in her bedroom, Elizabeth came to her final decision. It was not enough to reveal the secret. It was not enough to return each daughter to her rightful family. That would only be justice. But Elizabeth wanted something greater than justice. She wanted redemption. Victoria's arrogance needed to be shattered. Isabella's kindness needed to be tested. Only then would both girls understand their true worth. Staring at the photograph of her late husband, she whispered as though he were listening, "You would think me cruel, but I am doing this for them. This may be the only chance to save them." And with a heart torn in two, Elizabeth began to plan the exchange that would change both their lives forever. The silence inside the Collins mansion was heavier than ever. Elizabeth paced back and forth across the grand living room, her hands restless. She knew the moment had come. She could no longer keep the secret. She called out for her daughter. "Victoria, we need to talk. It's important," she said firmly. Victoria descended the stairs with an expression of boredom. "If this is another one of your lectures about responsibility, save it. I don't have time for this." Elizabeth took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "No, this time it's different. It's not about money. It's about who you really are." At that same moment, Miguel Ramirez received an unexpected phone call. A calm but heavy voice asked him to come. "I need to speak with you." "It's about your daughter." Confused and uneasy, Miguel agreed. He brought Isabella with him, who looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. Hours later, the two families stood face to face in a room thick with tension. Elizabeth's heart pounded as she looked around. In the corner, Helen Porter, the elderly nurse, sat weeping silently. Elizabeth began, her voice steady but trembling. 20 years ago, our lives were bound together by a terrible mistake. Victoria rolled her eyes and let out a mocking laugh. "Another drama? What is it this time?" Helen rose to her feet, tears spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. "It was me. I switched you both at the hospital. I was exhausted, confused, and I made the worst mistake of my life." A heavy silence fell over the room. The two young women stared at each other in shock. "This is a lie," Victoria shouted, her voice shaking with rage. But Elizabeth cut her off, tears streaming down her face. "It's not a lie. You are not my biological daughter. Your real family is right here in front of you." Victoria staggered back, as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Across the room, Isabella brought a trembling hand to her mouth. Miguel pulled her into his arms, his voice breaking with emotion. "Then, she's truly my little girl, my blood." Elizabeth nodded, her voice filled with pain. "Yes, you raised my daughter, and I raised yours." The weight of the truth pressed down on everyone. Victoria, in tears of fury, screamed, "I'm not changing anything. I am who I am, and no one can take that from me." But Elizabeth, her voice firm and unwavering, declared, "You will. Because this is the truth, and because you need to learn humility. From this day on, each of you will live with your family of blood." Tears were still drying on their faces when the decision was made. From that moment on, the two young women would live with their families of blood. There was no room for denial. It was painful, unfair, incomprehensible, but inevitable. In the small coastal town, Victoria Collins, the former rich girl, stepped out of the car carrying an expensive leather suitcase. She looked around with disdain. Barefoot children playing in the street, colorful laundry hanging on clotheslines, neighbors laughing loudly as they spoke in simple tones. She lifted her chin with disgust. "This place looks like a slum. I won't survive with this smell of fish in the air." Miguel Ramirez, her biological father, approached with patient eyes. "Welcome, daughter. This is your home now." Victoria dragged the suitcase inside as if it were a cross she was forced to bear. The old furniture, peeling walls, and worn-out floor made her sigh in disapproval. In the kitchen, the smell of rice and beans surrounded her. "I don't eat this. Don't you have real food?" she complained. Miguel smiled tenderly. "Here, we eat what we have, but always with gratitude." She rolled her eyes, unaware that a neighbor was watching her from outside with a mixture of pity and judgment. Meanwhile, in Miami, Isabella Ramirez, the former poor girl, crossed the mansion's gates as if entering a palace. Her eyes widened at the immaculate garden, the white columns, and the golden glow of the windows. Inside, she could hardly believe what she saw. Sparkling chandeliers, velvet sofas, marble staircases. Elizabeth Collins embraced her tightly, tears shining in her eyes. "Welcome home, my daughter. I lost you for 20 years, but I will never let you go without again." Isabella wandered through the mansion's corridors, her steps hesitant. When she opened the wardrobe, she gasped. Dozens of designer dresses, luxury handbags, glittering shoes. Holding one of the dresses against herself, she smiled at the mirror. "I deserve this. I always did." Back in the small town, Victoria attempted her first shower. The moment she turned the faucet, she screamed, "What? There's no hot water. How do you people live like this?" Miguel chuckled. "You'll get used to it. Cold water builds strength." Slamming the bathroom door, she stomped out, fuming. Later, she was asked to help sweep the backyard. Attempting the task in high heels, she tripped and fell flat on the ground, drawing loud laughter from the neighbors. "Look at the princess turning into a housemaid," one woman teased. Her face turned crimson. She stood up, shouting in rage, "You don't know who you're talking to." But the neighbors only laughed louder. Meanwhile, Isabella sat at her first elegant dinner. Rows of cutlery surrounded her plate, and several glasses gleamed before her. She froze, unsure which to use. She grabbed the wrong fork, then reached for the wrong glass, fumbling nervously. That was when Veronica, a socialite with a venomous smile, struck her first blow. "Darling, there are so many forks and knives, it's confusing for anyone. Imagine how hard it must be for someone who's never seen this before." Isabella forced a smile, hiding her embarrassment. But deep inside, a flame of pride ignited. She would not allow anyone to look down on her. The next day, Isabella, now living as the wealthy daughter, was invited to a glamorous party in a Miami penthouse. Veronica, the venomous socialite, welcomed her with a false embrace and a cold gaze. "Welcome to our world, darling. But remember, here, a single wrong step can cost you everything." Isabella smiled politely, unaware that Veronica was already plotting her downfall. Between whispers and mocking glances, Veronica leaned toward a friend and sneered. "She may be dressed in silk, but she always smell of fish." They both laughed, not caring if anyone overheard. That night, both girls cried in their new beds. Victoria, the former rich girl, lay on a hard mattress in a room without air conditioning. She sobbed quietly into the dark. "I don't belong here. I'll never get used to this." Isabella, the former poor girl, lay wrapped in silk sheets, staring at the massive ceiling above her. She whispered to herself with trembling excitement, "I finally made it. I'm somebody now." But fate had already been written. Neither of them knew that in the days to come, life would teach lessons powerful enough to change their souls forever. Time was beginning to weigh heavily on both young women. The exchange was no longer just a shocking revelation. It had become a reality shaping every moment of their lives. In the Miami mansion, Isabella, the new rich daughter, woke up late, wrapped in silk sheets, still dazzled by her new life. When she came downstairs for breakfast, she found Veronica already there, sitting elegantly, legs crossed, sipping tea as if she owned the place. "Good morning, darling," Veronica said with a sharp smile. "I've been waiting for you. We need to talk." Isabella, still confused by her presence, replied, "You came this early?" What a surprise! Veronica leaned forward, her tone dripping with superiority. "It's because I care. You've entered a very dangerous world, and you need to learn quickly. Here, every gesture, every word, every companion can determine your future." Isabella listened in silence, both intimidated and fascinated by Veronica's authority. Then came the first strike of venom. "And speaking of companions, I heard you have a boyfriend. A working man, isn't he?" Isabella blushed. "Yes, he's always been by my side." Veronica smiled coldly. "Darling, that kind of man may be sweet, but he doesn't fit with you now. You're a star. He will only drag you down, embarrass you in front of everyone." The words echoed like poison in Isabella's heart. Hours later, her boyfriend arrived at the mansion. He carried simple flowers he had picked himself, his eyes filled with tenderness. "I brought these for you. They're not expensive roses, but they smell like our hometown," he said, offering the bouquet. Isabella smiled awkwardly, glancing toward Veronica, who watched from afar with a sarcastic smirk. "Thank you, but you didn't have to." Her boyfriend frowned. "You're different." Something's changed. Before she could respond, Veronica walked over. "Oh, how sweet. Wildflowers. But do they really suit this environment?" "Here, darling, we use imported arrangements." The young man shot her a look of contempt. "Who is this?" "A friend," Isabella replied quickly, trying to avoid conflict. But Veronica leaned toward her and whispered loud enough for him to hear. "You deserve more. So much more." Wounded, he clenched his fist. "So that's it? Now I'm a burden to you?" "It's not that," Isabella murmured, torn. But the damage was done. Veronica had already planted the seed of doubt. Meanwhile, in the small coastal town, Victoria faced her new job at the local diner. Dressed in a worn apron, she carried trays with visible boredom. In her first hour, she dropped 2 glasses. In the second, she gave the wrong change to a customer. "I'm not cut out for this," she cried, slamming the tray onto the counter. The owner, a middle-aged man, crossed his arms. "Then go home and live off what?" "Here, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is getting back up and trying again." The customers chuckled, but not cruelly. There was even warmth in their laughter. "Look at the princess serving coffee," teased a woman, but her smile wasn't mean. The young waiter, the one who had shown her kindness since the beginning, stepped closer. "You're not as bad as you think. Trust me, tomorrow will be better." Victoria looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. For the first time, someone believed in her, not for her money, not for her name, but for herself. Back at the mansion, Isabella hid the simple flowers in a corner, unable to throw them away but too afraid to defend them in front of Veronica. Her boyfriend had left, heartbroken, feeling he was already losing her. In the humble town, Victoria smiled proudly as she served a cup of coffee without spilling a drop. A small gesture, a small victory, but it made her heart beat with pride. Fate seemed to play cruel games with the 2 young women. While one drowned in a golden sea of illusions, the other stumbled through the mud of humble life, yet slowly discovered a life richer than any gold. Inside the Miami mansion, Veronica sharpened her claws. She had noticed that the poor boyfriend still lingered in Isabella's heart. For her, that was unacceptable. "I won't let a lowlife steal the stage I've built for her," she hissed to a confidant, sipping champagne. "And what will you do?" the friend asked. Veronica's lips curled in a wicked smile. "I'll show everyone that he's nothing but an opportunist, and I'll make her throw him out of her life herself." Days later, she intercepted Daniel, Isabella's boyfriend, as he left work. Dressed in exaggerated elegance, drenched in perfume, she smiled sweetly. "We need to talk." "It's about her." Daniel looked at her warily. "What do you want with me?" "I want to help. I know you love her. I know you feel her slipping away. Maybe I can be your bridge back to her heart, naive and desperate." He hesitated, then followed her into a private lounge at an exclusive club. Once alone, Veronica moved in slowly, her voice dripping with poison. "You're handsome," in a rough, simple way. I can almost see why she fell for you. He stepped back, uncomfortable. "Look, I didn't come here for this. I just want to know how I can." Before he could finish, Veronica threw herself at him, pressing her lips against his. He pushed her away immediately. "Are you insane? I love her. I would never do this." But it was too late. A hidden photographer had captured the perfect shot, the precise moment that looked like a willing kiss. Veronica reapplied her lipstick with a triumphant laugh. "Thank you, darling. Now I have everything I need." That same night, at a glamorous party, Veronica raised her glass and called for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have something shocking to share." Suddenly, the big screen lit up with the incriminating photo. Gasps and whispers filled the room. Laughter rippled across the elite crowd. "This is the so-called faithful boyfriend," Veronica declared theatrically. "And even I wasn't safe from his advances." Isabella froze, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. Daniel rushed to her side. "It's a lie. She forced me." It was all a setup. But Isabella, consumed by pride and shame in front of the glittering crowd, shouted back, "Enough. I don't believe you. Get out of my life." Daniel's eyes filled with pain as he whispered, "One day you'll see who she really is. But by then, it may be too late." He walked away, leaving the party in stunned silence. Veronica smiled in triumph, while Isabella, in tears, felt her soul shatter, yet she could not admit she might have made a mistake. Meanwhile, in another part of Florida, Victoria faced her own humiliation. After missing the bus twice, she finally squeezed into an overcrowded, suffocating vehicle. Pressed between two exhausted workers, she wrinkled her nose in disgust and muttered loudly, "My God, what is that awful smell?" The man beside her, his clothes soaked with the sweat of a long day's work, turned to her, not with anger, but with quiet firmness. "That's the smell of work. The smell of waking up early, sweating all day, and coming home tired. The smell of survival." The words struck her like a punch to the chest. She looked away, tears stinging her eyes. I'm sorry," she whispered, almost inaudible. In that moment, more than ever, she realized how arrogant she had been her entire life. At the mansion, Isabella locked herself in her room, broken, convinced she had lost the only man who truly loved her. In the humble town, Victoria wept quietly, not out of rage this time, but out of something new, remorse. Fate was leading them in opposite directions, yet toward the same truth. Pain would be the only teacher strong enough to change them both. Isabella, the new rich girl, woke up surrounded by luxury, but her heart felt heavier than ever. The enormous bedroom, the wardrobe filled with designer dresses, the endless rows of shoes. None of it mattered anymore. Lying in bed, she remembered her boyfriend's face that night, his desperate plea echoing in her mind. "I would never do this to you." The words haunted her, but her pride still spoke louder than her heart. She rose, walked to the mirror, and stared at her reflection. "Why does it hurt so much? If I finally have everything I ever dreamed of?" Tears slid down her cheeks. She was surrounded by gold, yet she felt poorer than ever. In the living room, Veronica awaited her, feigning compassion. "Darling, you did the right thing. That boy was just a leech. Imagine the shame if you had stayed with him." Isabella, still sobbing, tried to convince herself. "Maybe you're right." Veronica raised her wine glass with satisfaction. "Of course I am. You're one of us now. And here." There is no room for weakness. But once alone, Isabella collapsed, clinging to her pillow like a lost child. For the first time, she felt like a prisoner in a world that wasn't truly hers. Meanwhile, in the small coastal town, Victoria was experiencing the opposite. At the diner, she still stumbled, still made mistakes, but something inside her was changing. She served coffee to an elderly woman who smiled warmly. "Thank you, dear." "You remind me of my daughter." The words pierced her heart. For the first time, someone saw her not as arrogant or spoiled, but as part of the community. That evening, she walked to the beach with her kind coworker. Sitting on the sand, they watched the waves together. "You know," she said softly, "I always thought I was better than everyone. I always complained about everything. But here, even with nothing, I feel alive." The young man smiled gently. "That's because you're learning to see what really matters." She fell silent, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. For the first time, her tears were not of rage or vanity, but of gratitude. Back at the mansion, Isabella suffocated beneath her silk sheets, lost in a void that wealth could never fill. In the humble town, Victoria lay down on a thin mattress, yet her heart felt lighter than it ever had before. Fate was cruel but fair. Both would need to face pain to truly learn the value of life. Soon after, Isabella prepared for the grandest ball of the season. Veronica had chosen her dress, red, sparkling, provocative. "Tonight, darling, you will shine. Tonight, you will prove to everyone that you belong here." But as she entered the ballroom, surrounded by false smiles and envious glances, she felt lonelier than ever. Guests approached with compliments, but every word cut like a blade. "You look stunning." "How lucky you are to have fallen into this family." Inside each phrase was another knife. Then, across the room, she noticed a waiter who reminded her of Daniel. Her heart clenched. If he were here, I wouldn't feel so lost. Sensing her distraction, Veronica whispered in her ear, "Forget him. Here, love is just a detail. Power is what matters." Isabella forced a smile, but deep in her eyes, the first cracks of regret began to show. Meanwhile, at the diner, Victoria worked tirelessly. The place was packed. She carried heavy trays, wiped tables, and rushed from one customer to another. She sweated, grew tired, but did not give up. When a client complained about a wrong order, she took a deep breath, apologized, and redid everything with patience. From the counter, the owner watched her with emotion in his eyes. At the end of the shift, the clients clapped for her spontaneously. "This girl has grit," said an old woman. "She's not arrogant anymore," added another. Victoria pressed her hand against her chest, overwhelmed. For the first time, she felt real pride. "I did it. I really did it," she whispered. Back at the ball, Veronica struck her final blow. Amid the dancing, she raised her voice loud enough for all to hear. It's funny how she tries to fit in, but deep down, we all know where she really comes from. The ballroom erupted in muffled laughter. Isabella froze, her face burning with shame. She fled into the garden, tears streaming. "I gave up the only man who truly loved me. For this, for these people who laugh at me." Her own words echoed back at her. For the first time, she admitted the truth. She was becoming everything she once despised. One girl wept in the midst of luxury, but without love. The other smiled, exhausted, in a humble town, embraced by community. Isabella discovered that wealth without truth was nothing but loneliness. Victoria discovered that humility could be the greatest of all victories. Fate was ready for its final turn. In the humble home, Miguel Ramirez prepared a special dinner. The smell of simple food filled the air: rice, beans, and fresh fish. For the first time, the two families sat together at the same table. Victoria, once arrogant, now helped set the plates, smiling timidly. There was no trace of superiority in her gestures, only gratitude. Isabella, elegant but with a heavy gaze, sat quietly, lost in thought. The silence weighed heavily until Elizabeth spoke. "We are all here because fate placed us at a crossroads, and because, somehow, we need to learn from one another. Blood may bind us, but love is what truly unites us." Her words lingered in the air. Everyone bowed their heads, reflecting. The next day, Isabella was invited to another grand event. As always, Veronica clung to her side, smiling sweetly, her venom hidden behind a mask. But that golden ballroom became the stage for her downfall. Without realizing it, Isabella overheard Veronica whispering to a friend, "It was the best weapon I ever used. That forced kiss was perfect for the photo. Looked like he wanted me." And the fool believed it without hesitation. The words cut like a blade. Isabella froze, her heart pounding. So it was true. Everything was a setup. Overcome with fury and regret, she rose abruptly and shouted, "Enough, Veronica! You lied to me, destroyed my life, drove away the only man who truly loved me." Gasps echoed. Veronica tried to cover, but her own friend confirmed it. "It's true." She admitted it. The ballroom filled with murmurs. Veronica, humiliated, stormed out, defeated. That same night, Isabella ran to the coastal town. She found Daniel sitting on the pier, gazing at the sea. With tears in her eyes, she fell to her knees before him. "Forgive me. I was blind. I was proud. I let her poison destroy what we had. You always told me the truth, and I refused to believe." He looked at her in silence, wounded, but love still in his eyes. "I loved you every second, even when you pushed me away." She wept harder. "I love you, and now I know. Without you, I am nothing." At last he embraced her, and in that embrace, true love, tested by fire, bloomed again. Meanwhile, in the humble neighborhood, Victoria gathered the neighbors she had so often mistreated. Head lowered, she spoke with sincerity. "I was arrogant, selfish. I treated you all as if you were less than me. But I've learned that you are greater than I ever was. You taught me the value of work, of friendship, of dignity. I beg your forgiveness." The crowd was moved. An old woman stepped forward and hugged her. "Now you are truly one of us." Applause broke out across the patio, and Victoria cried, not from pain this time, but from relief. Days later, both families reunited. This time there was no bitterness, only renewed bonds. Miguel and Elizabeth exchanged a long, tender look. Perhaps fate had reserved for them, too, a second chance. On the beach at sunset, the two young women walked side by side. Victoria spoke softly. "I lost everything, and only then did I learn to value what truly matters." Isabella, smiling through tears, replied, "And I gained everything, only to discover that without love and humility, it all meant nothing." They embraced. Behind them, the sea glowed gold beneath the setting sun, as if blessing their moment of reconciliation. Fate can trade paths, it can invert worlds, but only love, humility, and forgiveness reveal who we truly are.